Hello and welcome to Gar Borras' Time Machine. Gar, this is episode 20, part 2 of what's going to be a 3-part episode. Part 2 today we're going to post next Saturday, and we're going to be talking about American Graffiti and the music and soundtrack, and along with that we're going to be talking a little bit about Wolfman Jack, because he obviously is a big part of the musical landscape at that time. So before we get into all that, I want to talk a little bit. I forgot to mention, which I thought was very interesting in part 1, that in regards to Mackenzie Phillips, what like a lot of these people that were kind of stars that were just on the rise at the time, you know, she was only 12 years old at the time. So of all the actors, it was very important that they had to get her parents like to kind of sign off on her taking part in the film, and she needed to actually have a guardian kind of with her at all times at the locations, and her parents weren't able to do that. So for the entire filming of the movie, they kind of just signed her away over to somebody that was working on the film and left their daughter in 12-year-old daughter in charge. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, it was her parents were hippies.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was a completely different
world
kind of mindset.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there were things that were also, her dad was one of the members of the Mamas and the Papas.
Yeah, John Phillips. Yeah,
and he was not a very good influence on his daughter.
Yeah. And so
there's a lot of stories about him doing drugs with his daughter and things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me, that they would make a decision like that, with that kind of a background. But I think normal parents would be like much more protective.
Yeah, that's my thought.
Of their child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like a 12-year-old kid, and when you think about it, really doesn't reflect well on the parents at all.
That's kind of my reason for bringing up, kind of my thought. And now, before we get into episode 2 today, another thing that we got to kind of, talk about here about soundtracks and music is American Graffiti was one of probably the first major motion picture soundtrack that was really would set the standard for future soundtracks. We talked a little bit about that in episode 1, and the other thing with that is American Graffiti was really the first kind of film that was referred to as a like summer blockbuster. Every summer now that's become kind of a norm. What's going to be the big blockbuster film of the year? Like it might be something like Star Wars or Spider-Man, Batman, whatever the case may be. But I mean, that because
American Graffiti started it.
Yeah, and in fact, talking more about the musical landscape and stuff, because of American Graffiti, it was George Lucas who created the role of the music supervisor with American Graffiti, and that's a role, music supervisor, but it did not exist before this film, and that's the guy or gal who is in charge of deciding what songs to place in the movie and that. And so again, American Graffiti and George Lucas has a lot to do with music that is placed in films today.
Well, it really, when George Lucas made this is before anybody really knew who he was.
Yeah.
And he was just, kind of at that point where he was getting that chance to establish himself. And so when he got approached with the idea of him spearheading American Graffiti, he jumped on it because it really he embraced it because it encompassed his childhood, his high school years, and obviously some very, very close and cherished memories during that time of his life, because when you talk about a movie like this, because we did talk about it in the first episode. This was a very low budget movie.
Yeah.
It did not cost much to make. because nobody was really behind it. They were pulling the trigger, but they were very cautiously, moving forward with it. And so, when the movie got released, and it was this huge success, and because it had such a low cost in making, it just made obscene amounts of money. It was like the movie was pure profit.
Yeah, and here's a funny thing. In part 3, we're going to be talking about More Graffiti, which is a follow-up film from 1979, and we're going to really talk more in detail about that the next episode. But I bring it up because I was reading today that when they went to do that film, because unlike with American Graffiti, like you said, that they had very poor expectations for it. They didn't think it was going to be successful. By the time the second film comes out, they're thinking that's going to even be more successful, because by the time 1979 comes around, you've got Happy Days with Vern and Shirley on TV. So in reference to Ron Howard and Cindy Williams, they're much bigger stars. And a lot of the stars from the first film return. And a lot of these people are, even Suzanne Summers is a bigger name by then with Three's Company. And they're thinking, okay, that was a fear with American Graffiti, the original film. They don't have a name. They don't have a named star yet. And so that's why they didn't believe in the film. And they thought, okay, these people are much more established at this point. It's going to be much more successful. And oddly enough, when they had those high expectations, the second film, which we're going to get into more, like I said, next episode, was not as successful as the first one. Kind of interesting, huh?
Well, I think, by that time, I think the public had, kind of reached a point where, most follow-up movies were a disappointment. Yeah. And so I think, the public at that time was of the mentality that, of towards, the follow-up of American Graffiti, having that same kind of mentality. It was kind of prevalent at that time. Yeah. You just really didn't see a whole lot of movies that had follow-ups that were, they were usually a big drop-off.
Yeah, and Gar, talking about the soundtrack alone, I mean, 40 songs, and so I don't think we're going to have time to talk about every single song in the soundtrack, but there are a lot of highlights. And I think when George Lucas did the original film, he wanted to make a coming-of-age movie. That was goal number 1 from what I understand. Goal number 2 is he wanted it to feature a lot of rock and roll, because rock and roll was his music. So it's very interesting if you look at the songs that appear on the soundtrack, and we're going to talk about some of them, that a lot of these songs come from the 50s. So this is definitely the music of George Lucas's generation, And what's interesting is you could talk to a guy from his generation, from your generation, from my generation. I think the one thing we'll all agree on is, like, for example, I typically listen to hard rock and metal, but I can get down to a lot of these tunes because it's stuff I've heard on the radio all my life. And, by the time American Graffiti comes out, a lot of these songs are 20, at least 20 years old or so. And people have heard this stuff on the radio. And I was trying to think, besides, movies, a lot of times, like when you go see a movie and you hear one of these songs that kind of, means something to you, it could be because you remember the first time you heard it on the radio. Maybe you heard the song when you went on your first date, or you kissed your first girlfriend or something. Songs have a way of kind of attaching themselves to special moments in our lives.
Well, yeah, but then also the 1950s was when music, the rebellion part of music really became very prevalent. Yeah. It was that music, back in the 50s was considered vulgar.
Oh yeah.
And it was, it's kind of, we look at back now and it's so squeaky clean bubblegum, now, but when you went back in the 1950s, rock and roll was very looked down upon, which sparked the young teens to really latch onto it. This is theirs, and became their rebellion.
Well, you make a very.
I think rebellion, has existed in music for a long time, but the 50s is when it kind of really skyrocketed.
Yeah, you make a very good point, because I think most people can kind of understand. You could kind of see how somebody could make the connection between like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. Okay, you could kind of see somebody saying maybe they're devil worshippers. Just okay, I can kind of make that link, even if it's not true. But then going back all the way to the 50s, you make a very good point. We often forget that a lot of the censorship stuff against rock music started with Elvis in the 50s, and just because of the way he was dancing and moving his hips, having really nothing to do with the lyrics or any of his songs. It's just the way he moved. He's moving it in a sexual way. He's a bad influence on the youth of the world.
Well, it just makes that point that whenever you have a part of society that's trying to hold another part of society down, under that pretext of that it's a bad influence for our young kids growing up and stuff like that, and so they're trying to suppress it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what happens?
They want it more. They want it even more.
Exactly.
Like you go back to...
Exactly. And that happens virtually every single time. As soon as any part of society tries to suppress something, the next day, now you want it even more.
Yeah, what's interesting is you even go back to the PMRC in the early 80s, all those senators' wives trying to stick over records. Kids still went out about the records. They wanted it even more, like you said. And another thing, people, when they try to censor stuff, they fail to realize it creates a black market for stuff like that. Okay, well, if somebody can't buy a Quiet Riot or a Twisted Sister record, in the store because they're not going to sell it at a particular store, you can just go,
they're going to go out and get it anyway.
Yeah, get it somehow. And it makes those acts even more popular. Now, again, like I said, a lot of this music, it means something to people. People remember a special time in their life. And one of those songs I think that we can, off of this soundtrack, that I think holds a special place in my heart and a lot of people's is Rock Around the Clock. Now, for so many obvious reasons. Now, when I hear Rock Around the Clock, okay, Bill Haley in the comments, they're the ones that made it famous. Somebody else wrote it, but that's the version that everybody knows and loves. And when I think about that song, I think about not just this film, but Happy Days, because it was the original theme song for Happy Days. And we've kind of made that connection. And so, interestingly enough, I was looking up some facts on this song. It says, the song Rock Around the Clock is considered by many people as the song that brought rock and roll music to the mainstream culture around the world. The song is ranked number 159 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time.
Well, the 1960s was my elementary school years, and we're talking kindergarten, all the way, up to middle school. And all of that music that's the soundtrack for American Graffiti was basically the soundtrack of my childhood during that time. Because all of that stuff, when my parents had the radio on, because back in the 1960s, you pretty much had the radio on all day. It was like it was always the background. Whether you were in the kitchen, making something to eat, or whether you were in the garage working on your car, or you see what I mean? It was it was the soundtrack of my life, during that time period, and a lot of these songs have some really special memories, because I clearly remember them, being played on the radio and being very popular songs during that time.
Yeah.
Rock Around the Clock, I would say would be one of the pinnacles of success of the songs during that time, but the entire soundtrack for the movie really is the entire soundtrack of my elementary school years, all the way from elementary, because back in those days, I don't think preschool was very prevalent. I mean, sure it was, but it wasn't very prevalent back in those days. You basically went your first introduction to school was going to kindergarten.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays it's a bit different. There's if you got the money, you can definitely give your kids a head start, advantage over other kids. But there's just I kind of recently got into this. I think it's a Prime Video, an Amazon Prime Video.
Oh, sure, sure.
Show called The Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Okay.
And the reason why I really like the show is because they really visually and socially capture that time period. The only thing I really kind of don't like about the show is the way they talk. The whole it's like the way they talk. It's like the way people talk in the TV shows from the 60s.
Oh, okay.
Not the way that people talked when they were actually at home in the 1960s, but the way they talked when they were on a TV show. And that's the way they present it in Miss Maisel. But I really like the show because it does capture that. But what my point is there was I think it was the second season, she went on tour with this really famous, hugely successful act, Shy Baldwin.
Oh, okay.
And when you listen to this guy sing, immediately you think of the guy from the Platters, because he almost sounds exactly like the singer for the Platters.
Amazing.
And really, the guy's got a great voice. Whoever the guy is that's singing for the Platters, the guy's got an absolutely amazing voice. But it's really kind of trippy to see how a character in another show based on a similar time period with the singer basing his voice on another famous singer from that time period. And really, when you listen to the Platters, that guy's a great singer.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Gar, is we're talking about a movie that next year will turn 50 years old. And a lot of the featured music in the film from 50 years ago was already 20 years old when it came out, So, I mean, and I think you make a great point that this is not just a lot of the music from your generation, but 50 years old, okay, at this point, a little more. So it's the soundtrack to a lot of different people from a lot of different generations. And so much to the point, how many times, I mean, we could be talking about Rock Around the Clock or any of the other featured songs in the movie. How many times have you also gone to a dance and danced to a lot of these songs? I mean, I can't tell you. That's kind of been my experience,
Well, I just, when I was a kid, I used to absolutely absolutely love that song, Book of Love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonder who wrote the Book of Love.
I got you.
It's so funny now because I'm such a, my musical tastes have gone in so many crazy directions and everything like that, but you really get back to it and it's really simple, I just loved, I was so young, but I was still drawn to music like a magnet.
Yeah, and here's another song. Okay, and this is another thing I wanted to kind of talk about, because another song I wrote down that kind of I always really liked. I heard it on the radio a lot over the years. I've seen played at dances and stuff. At the Hop. Now here's the thing. Okay, that came out like 1973, the year the film was released. So it's about 50 years old. Now I've always heard the song, never knew who did it. It apparently by this band Flash Cadillac and the Continental Kids. Never heard the band name, never heard anything else they've done, but I know the song, if you know what I mean. How many of these songs can you say that about?
Well, for me, there's a lot.
Yeah.
It's just, I could hear it and I go, I remember that song, but I might not remember the name of the song
or the artist,
or who did it, but I definitely, remember this, the songs.
Yeah, and then here's another song. I know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm willing to bet it has a special meaning to you because of playing the role of Axl Rose in your Guns N' Roses tribute band, Appetite for Destruction. Since I Don't Have You, originally done by the Starlighters.
Yep.
I got to ask, have you ever performed that tune in your tribute band?
No, but I've heard it.
Yeah.
He does a good version of it.
I think he stays true to the original form. I don't want to even say he really rocks it up. I mean, he does it in the Axl way, but he stays true to the original form, and I think you could almost close your eyes and think it was, but I think it means something to me because, like you, I'm a Guns N' Roses fan, and that was the single they released off the Spaghetti Incident in 1993 or whenever the album came out. But for that reason alone, but I was a fan of the song before, and it just kind of, when they did their version, I kind of said, okay, this kind of solidifies what a great song that is, that somebody like Guns N' Roses would do a cover of it.
Well, another thing that I found was I found that there was a band called the Starlighters.
Oh, okay.
And Joe Pesci used to play guitar for the Starlighters.
Wow.
A lot of people don't even know that Joe Pesci was in a famous band.
Yeah.
And that he knows how to play guitar.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know this, or a lot of people probably don't, but how many people would know the fact that Johnny Depp plays guitar for Alice Cooper in a band called Hollywood Vampires with Joe Perry?
Well, Johnny Depp's not a bad guitar player.
No, that's what I'm saying. A lot of people don't know that, but yeah, they put out two great CDs. Hollywood Vampires features Alice Cooper, Joe Perry, Johnny Depp on guitar, so pretty cool.
I would go see that show.
You bet. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, but Jimi Hendrix was in the Starlighters.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is like way before he reinvented guitar.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people don't know this, but Fender, the guitar company, had pretty much made up their mind that the Stratocaster and the Telecaster were old models, and they wanted to replace those guitars with the Jazzmaster and the Jaguar guitars because those had more modern features and things like that, and they had made their decision that that's what they were going to do. They were going to discontinue making the Stratocaster and the Telecaster, and Jimi Hendrix just reinvented guitar at that time, and then the next thing you know, everybody wanted a Stratocaster because of Jimi Hendrix.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah.
And so actually, Jimi Hendrix caused the company to completely abandon that, and they just stepped up production of the Stratocaster to fulfill the desire for that, and history showed that the Jazzmaster and the Jaguar became novelty items, per se, and the Stratocaster and the Telecaster are virtual iconic guitars.
Well, you got to remember,
by today.
You got to remember, I mean, Jimi Hendrix is the guy that played the guitar with his teeth. I mean, I know there have been many who've tried since, but I don't think any have been as successful at that.
Nobody showed him how to do it.
Yeah, and I mean,
he was a trailblazer, from the word go. But yeah, he was in the Starlighters. Joe Pesci was in the Starlighters. Just really, kind of scratch your head, like, oh my gosh. I guarantee you, anybody that listens to this, is probably going to be scratching their head. Joe Pesci played guitar in a famous band?
It's funny because a lot of people kind of have these like kind of dual dreams. I mean, like I've heard Johnny Depp even talking about this, where he always wanted to play in a band, and he's finally getting a chance to play in a high-profile band with guys like Joe Perry and Alice Cooper. He's like the movie career just kind of came along first, and then because of that, because people know who he is, he's kind of getting to live out his other dream. Or even guys like Bret Michaels and John Bon Jovi, they start out doing music and then they want to become movie stars and they start trying to do movies and stuff like that, and some are successful and some aren't. I mean, even Elvis Presley, we mentioned, he's kind of the ultimate one that was able to do that, do both music and movies.
Well, back in the 50s, that was the norm.
Yeah.
When you watched anyone, when studios were developing talent, they were developing talent to have many things that they would be able to do. They would develop their singing, they would develop their dancing, they would develop their drama acting abilities, they would develop it was just virtually 90% of the people that were acting back in the 50s were multi-talented actors and actresses, and you even go back to like Doris Day and she famous singer, famous actress,
or even
you go back even further. Frank Sinatra, famous actor,
which led to the Rat Pack.
But it was the norm back in those days that people had. Nowadays, it just seems that people are kind of focus on one area and they try to become really good at that one thing, but it was very, very different. The actors and actresses were very multi-talented back in the 50s, I actually prefer the talent that's developed over the one-trick pony. Type of stuff that you see much more nowadays.
Gar Borras, that's why I do this show with you, because I mean, we're doing an episode on the soundtrack to American Graffiti, and look where this conversation is taken. I mean, at various points we talked about Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra, but I love that because I mean, it leads to future episodes, and you bring up somebody like Frank Sinatra. That's a great example of a song and dance man who can act and kind of do it all, and that kind of ties into talking about soundtracks and how George Lucas and American Graffiti led the way for the big summer blockbuster that we have today, and the big soundtracks. I mean, it's a big thing if your band gets a song, especially an original song on a movie soundtrack these days. Even if you just have one song on the soundtrack, it's a lot of attention for a band or an artist, And so it just goes to show you that this movie George Lucas had his directing debut. It has led the way. I mean, and they were doing it before, though, like you said, with Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. I mean, so there was always that tie-in with music and film,
Well, okay. Back in the 1960s and the 1970s, what was considered a pinnacle of achievement was, for record sales was a gold record status. And back in that time, that was really considered, the pinnacle of success. When any artist was talking about it, they'd go, "Man, I got gold records all over my wall."
Yeah.
But when you look at American Graffiti, this is the soundtrack for a movie that back in 1970s, when gold records was the standard of pinnacle of achievement, and this album went triple platinum.
Oh yes, I wrote that down.
Triple platinum.
Yeah.
That makes gold records look like nothing.
Oh yeah. You made the point. Let's go down a list of some of these songs I wrote down. Okay, another one of those tunes. Why Do Fools Fall in Love? It's one of those songs that every time I hear it, it just kind of stays in my head. Again, this originally from 1956 from Frankie Lyman, I believe. And while I remember the song, but I'm not too familiar with who Frankie Lyman was. A little before my time, but I know more about the song, if you know, than I know, again, about the artist. But again, that's kind of amazing because it just shows you how people have grabbed onto songs like that.
Want to know something about me that a lot of people don't know?
Yeah, let's hear it. That's why we do this.
I'd say most of the popular dances from the 1960s, I know how to do.
Oh, wow.
I used to do those dances, way back in those days, and I know how to do the twist, I know how to do the jerk, I know how to do the monkey, I know how to do the swim.
Hey,
that's a little bit of, obscure, tidbits about me, but yes, I do know how to do. I could, I probably have to practice to get back into shape and everything like that. But yeah, I could get up on stage and do a Pulp Fiction dance scene.
Well, I would love that, like some kind of nod to those type of songs. Gar Borras does show tunes, or I don't know what you call it. But that would be.
I have been thinking about doing this because you did touch on this, and my musical tastes are so widely ranged. Another part of what I really enjoy is the crooners, like the Dean Martins, the Perry Comos, the Frank Sinatras, and that thing. And I've actually been thinking about doing some of those standards.
Yeah, you could. I could see you
just going down a completely different avenue, totally different style of singing, everything, But I have kicked that around.
Well,
somewhere along the line, if the opportunity arises where I can, dedicate the time to do it, because I don't like to do anything unless it's really, really good.
Yeah.
I don't want to do a half-hearted version of anything.
Well, my friend, I could see you
if I have the time to dedicate it to make it that good a quality, I would really like to do something like that.
I could see you doing that, and I'd like to go on record as encouraging you to do it, because for a lot of reasons, while you are very good at doing what you do with Appetite for Destruction. I mean, you've been doing that a long time, and before that, I know people may not know out there, but before that, you were you had a Cheap Trick tribute band where you went by the name of Garzander, and you're very good at that. But I think this could work for a lot of reasons. Well, and I don't think you should worry about like turning your back on the hard rock audience or people that typically would come see you with Appetite for Destruction, because I think a lot of people could get into this kind of music. And the fun thing about doing a show like this, you could have a type of set where you do an Elvis tune or two, you do like maybe a Frank Sinatra tune, you do a Beach Boy tune, you could do whatever you want. And there's all kinds of places you could do shows like that. I mean, dance clubs, you could go, some of these cruises are having, you could maybe get on one of those cruises and you could still do your main gig, and this could be a side gig or whatever you want it to be. But I could see you being good at this.
I'd just do it for the fun of it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, yeah.
Just to, I love challenges, and I love getting outside of the box.
Yeah.
And getting out of my comfort zone. I just discovered a long time ago, when you take yourself out of your comfort zone and you're really struggling, that's when you're growing as a human being. Really, the true way to really, become better at anything, you have to put yourself in a position where you're awkward, you're uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're struggling, you know what I mean? And but really, when you do that to yourself, you are growing. I love to do that to myself musically. I love to do that to myself in other aspects of what I do.
Yeah.
I've said this many times at rehearsals. I live for challenges.
See, and what's interesting is you told me it took you a while to get down the Axl Rose thing, where you thought you were convincing. I think you're probably at a point in doing it where you kind of do Axl like you breathe, if you know what I mean. There's not much thought into it.
I'm still growing.
Well, that's interesting.
There are still things that I can do better.
That's interesting because
and I don't really ever see myself. Doing his voice is so difficult.
Wow.
It really is. People. It's really. It's kind of shocking to me when I'm at like sound check. You're prepping your sound for your show that you're going to do that night and getting everything dialed in, and people would hear me do my Axl thing, and then they would ask me what effects I'm using to do what I'm doing, and I'm looking at them like quizzically, what?
Yeah.
You can't do that with an effect.
Yeah, I gotta tell people.
It has to actually come from you. There's no effect that's gonna do that.
Yeah.
But people would literally approach me, and this is not one time.
Wow.
This has been a number of times that people have approached me and asked me what effects that I'm using to do what I do, and it's really trippy, because part of what he does is he actually hits two notes at the same time.
Wow.
That's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah.
To sing and have two notes come out at the same time.
Yeah, I got to ask you, after you do a performance, like, how sore is your voice? Because a lot of those songs are kind of heavy and, those high notes. And I got to tell people, the last time you played the Santa Fe Spring Swap Meet, I went and caught the show. And what kind of tripped me out was, just to give you an example, I think you played, two of the songs you played that day was Patience and Double Talk and Jive. Now, if you look at those two songs, one's a ballad and one's kind of a really, rockin' tune. And it's kind of a extreme polar opposites of what you can do vocally. But yet, to be able to do a beautiful ballad like that, and you were playing it on the keyboards, I got to mention, and then something like Double Talk and Jive, it just showed me what you could do vocally. You're more of a one-trick pony, in other words.
Well, one things is, the only real way, to do it is studying proper vocal techniques.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of people that get up and sing.
Yeah.
But they're not really studying how to use their neck, how to use their chest, how to use their body, how to channel air through your through your breathing. Yeah, and stuff like that, because there are proper techniques that you use, that if you're using really good technique, you can do that, and you're not hurting your voice, and you're not doing damage and stuff like that. When a singer is getting up and singing, and they're not using proper technique, by the time they get to the end of their show, they're completely thrashed.
Wow, yeah.
Because what most people do, and I used to do it when I first started out too, and I didn't know any better. I used most of my vocal and everything came from my neck.
Wow.
And you're being too hard on one area, and what you're doing when you're using proper vocal technique is you're spreading it out to many areas. You see what I'm saying? And so you're not being like too hard on, say, your vocal cords, because you're putting it all on that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
There's a lot of things that I've learned how to do over the years, where I'm using my chest and my body, and that's a really big part. People will ask me, because I reach a lot of like really high stratospheric notes.
Yeah.
And people will ask me, if I'm doing that falsetto.
Yeah.
And for me, because I've studied vocal technique, I'm like going, that just does not make sense. You can't scream falsetto.
No.
See, that's the thing. People don't understand unless you're actually, how do you scream falsetto? You can't.
Well, see,
you see what I'm saying?
You've taken the time to know there's different techniques. A lot of people don't realize, even myself didn't realize that when all went into being a lead singer and all these different techniques. So we've learned something here today. And Gar, the final thing I'm going to say on your little idea here about you doing like a 50 type of act, like I think you could do it where kind of create like a an alter ego where you could call yourself like Bebop and Gar from the 50s, or come up with a better name, but where it's going to be a tribute more to the era than like to just one act. And I think that's what would make it so cool, because it could be an ever-changing act. I mean, how many tunes could go in and out of a set? It's just never ending.
I was just thinking about doing it, as a, thing, for people in my family that are of an older generation than myself, and doing something like that for them.
Well, I just tell you,
for their enjoyment. I really was never thinking about doing that as a public thing. I was thinking about doing it more as a tribute to people that are special to me, that are of my family's older generation.
Well, that would be cool too. I just a thought of like I would love to see a video of you doing it, at least like getting dressed up as Elvis or something. I mean, that would be so cool. I mean, I
look really good in a tux.
Yeah. So we'd love to see that. And getting back to the American Graffiti, a couple of these other tunes that I took note of. Johnny Be Good, a Chuck Berry tune. How many people don't love the late great Chuck Berry? I mean, Johnny Be Good's kind of his signature tune, but it's the one we all know and love,
Really, we need to give proper tribute to virtually every artist that is on that soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, another tidbit of history. When we refer to Buddy Holly nowadays, we always refer to him as either Buddy Holly or Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Yeah. But back in the day, when he was performing and he was at the height of his career, they were the Crickets.
Yeah, and
they were not being, marketed back in the 50s and the 60s as Buddy Holly and the Crickets. They were the Crickets.
Yeah, and I dare say that's because of his untimely death. I mean, oftentimes we hear Buddy Holly's name in reference also to the Big Bopper, who also has a song on here, Chantilly Lane. I always love that tune. And they died, of course, with Ritchie Valens in that tragic plane crash. And we also often, when you hear the names of those three great musicians who died relatively young, they often refer to it as the day the music died. Because, so that's kind of interesting. And then before we wrap it up today, we also got to, as I said, we're going to mention Wolfman Jack, who was a pinnacle to American Graffiti, the original film, because, I mean, he was, as we discussed in part one, George Lucas was a huge fan of him from back in the day when he, as a radio DJ. And what's kind of interesting is I was reading, once Lucas, he wanted to have a Wolfman Jack type kind of DJ in the film, and I guess word eventually got to Wolfman Jack, and he said, why have somebody like me? I'll do the film. And because of that, and because he was so grateful that he agreed to appear in the film, he gave him like a percentage of the film, and because of that, Wolfman Jack, from that one film, he had like guaranteed income. Like he'd always kind of receive a percentage of whatever of a movie
for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and because of his appearance in American Graffiti, he would go on to appear in other films and TV shows such as The Adventures of Wonder Woman, Vegas, Emergency. He appeared on Hollywood Squares, which was, I think someone we're going to have to do, episode. Hollywood Squares was like one of the premier game shows back in the day. And it was
Hollywood Squares and what was that, the dating game?
Oh yeah, the dating game. And what's interesting, the dating game also would feature like a lot of famous people that we did not know were going to go on to be famous. Like two I know off the top of my head, Suzanne Summers and John Ritter.
Yeah. There are so many famous. I suspect that because there are so many famous people that came from the dating game. I suspect, I got nothing that I can prove it, but I suspect that the studios were using that to gauge the popularity of people, whether they wanted to invest in those actors and actresses based on the marketability of the data that they got back from audiences' critiques. You see what I'm saying? Because back in those days, they used to, do questionnaires with audiences, and it's when Nielsen ratings and all of that stuff was just being kind of developed. And I honestly think that the dating game was a show for the studios to gather data about audiences' reactions to people.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Seeing if they were marketable before they ever decided to market them.
And what's interesting about, I was reading on Wolfman Jack, I'm assuming, because of your age, Gar, but you must have heard him when he was on the radio at one point.
He was on the radio, and he was absolutely the most famous disc jockey of that time. There was no other disc jockey that was more famous than him.
And here's what I was getting ready to ask you, because that is so true. And the interesting thing is, as we were talking about in part one of this episode, he was such a famous disc jockey, probably the most famous, as you point out, at the time, because of that huge radio voice. You know, people laugh about, I look like I belong on the, radio, because they're not very good looking. But that's the thing, like with Wolfman Jack really first got his start for American Graffiti, or anybody really knew what he looked like. It's kind of like Kiss back in the day. He had this real mystique about nobody knew where he was broadcasting from. Nobody really knew what he looked like. And I was reading, the more famous he got, or more people were listening to him, he started kind of to develop this persona. And he grew up a beard, and that's part of why he called himself Wolfman Jack. People said he looked like a wolf. And what's amazing is this guy would go on to become the legendary, I say legendary status, but he was, because ultimately, sadly, he died like only at the young age of 57. And look at all he accomplished in his life. I mean, he got to a point in his career in 1995, by that time, when he died, he at one point he started making public appearances. As a DJ, they want you to go and announce concerts and stuff like that, and appear at special events. And he was one of the.
He still has star power.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading, like, his family and his estate. They're still like selling clips of his old radio shows for people to hear, and that's why if people go to Gar Borras' Time Machine's Facebook page today, I posted like his appearance, like it had his appearance from American Graffiti. I'm going to post some more stuff that he did, but all these years after his death, because he was kind of the originator of the superstar DJ,
yes,
people are still checking out what he did, and I say it's sad that he died tragically young, because I think he still would be doing what he was doing today if he was still alive.
Well, who knows? Back in that time period, there was a lot of people that were dying at early ages because they just didn't have the ability to treat high blood pressure like the way they do now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I have high blood pressure, and I have to take high blood pressure medicine virtually every day. But back in those days, they were not able to treat it as well. So there was a lot of people that died in their late 50s and early 60s, which by today, we consider, oh man, that's dying real young.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, a big shout out to Taylor Hawkins. He passed away at 50, and I would have never. He was like one of the last people that I would think of as passing away. Just because of his demeanor. Whenever you saw him, he just always had this wonderful demeanor about him. It just seemed like I never really knew the guy, or never was ever close to him, but it just always seemed that he was just bubbling with positive personality, and he would just be such a wonderful person to be around. You know what I mean? He just never, you never looked at him and never thought of anything negative. You know what I mean? He just always seemed to be so positive.
Well, see,
and it's very shocking, that he passed away at 50.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with that. I mean, no matter if you're talking about Wolfman Jack dying at 57 or Taylor Hawkins died at age 50, I know for both you and me that hits kind of home because it's close to the ages that we are. And but the other thing, you look at a guy like Taylor Hawkins, just looking at him physically, you think the guy works out. He's a picture of health. I mean, stuff is starting to come out. People are wondering. I mean, he just died Friday, and then the following day, the police make a statement that they think was a drug overdose. But again, not that it matters. But you like you compare it to somebody like Kurt Cobain, people say, oh well, okay, he shot himself. He was a druggie. Not that it matters again. But you look at a guy like Taylor Hawkins. I mean, if he had any kind of drug addiction, and he kept it well hidden, he was able to have a successful career for the last 5 years or so. He's in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so he accomplished what he accomplished, and I think that's what people need to focus on. I think that's the most shocking thing. You look at a guy like Taylor Hawkins, and you think, oh wow, picture of health. He must have worked out. But again, a lot of us, a thing, just because somebody looks like they work out, maybe they don't. Maybe they just keep their secrets well hidden.
Who knows? Who knows? It's all speculation now because we're really not going to know anything for a while.
Yeah, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. It's a shame.
Really, it shouldn't. I mean, my impression of him will always be his bubbling personality.
Yeah.
He just, he just, every time I ever saw him, he just always appeared to be somebody that would be very enjoyable to hang around with. Yeah. And those are the kind of people, that it's really kind of heartbreaking when we lose them.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting about Taylor Hawkins' story, his 50-year life is, we all know him from the Foo Fighters. Before that, I understand when he was first starting out, he played drums for Alanis Morissette, which was a big star back in the 90s. But what's interesting is he's not even the original drummer of the Foo Fighters. And, like when Dave Grohl started the Foo Fighters, you're thinking, okay, wow, the drummer from Nirvana, he can sing lead and play guitar. Who's going to play the drums now? And Taylor Hawkins was not even the original drummer, but he made such an impact on those Foo Fighter fans that a lot of people forget there was even a drummer before him. And when we think of the Foo Fighters, those are the two names that come up. People think Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins. I'm sorry, it's just the case.
I mean, not to take anything away from the rest of the guys in the band, but you're right. Yeah. They are the two, really prevalent personalities of the band.
And I think, even though like it's Dave Grohl's band, I'd be interested to see who they get to replace him, because it's like those are going to be huge shoes to fill. I just putting that out there.
Well, I don't know. I see it taking the rest of the band a while to come to grips with it enough to even start thinking about moving on without Taylor. I honestly I just have a very strong feeling that it might take them a while.
Oh yeah, could you imagine? The day he died, this last Friday, it was right before they were supposed to go on stage, and he was found in his hotel room. They canceled the show obviously that night, but could you imagine, you're prepping for a show all day, and then you find out one of your band members has been found dead. Wow, what a shock.
Yeah.
Well, Gar Borras, we've had another fun episode, and just to kind of prep the folks for what's coming up next, we're going to do part 3 in 2 weeks from now of this American Graffiti episode, and we're going to be talking about the follow-up film we mentioned a little called More Graffiti, and I think it deserves to be talked about for an hour, because not even that I was even aware of the film, and that's part of the reason I want to talk about it, because I'm going to watch it later tonight so that I'll be ready for when we do that show, and I was reading it's not as popular as the original film, and we're going to kind of get into some of that, but I think it's worth a mention because a lot of people don't even know about it, and I think it's kind of fun to make those comparisons. And then after that, we're going to do an episode on the 50th anniversary of The Godfather, and part of the reason Gar and I decided to do this...
Oh man, am I looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and the part of the reason we decided to do that, and Gar and I talking, I was saying, hey Gar, it's an interesting fact that Francis Ford Coppola directed both films, and he kind of accidentally got involved in American Graffiti because they weren't going to do the film unless Lucas could get a named person involved in the film. And they decided after he had success with The Godfather, okay, maybe this Francis Ford Coppola, maybe this is some guy we should listen to. He knows a little something, because the same year, Godfather won the best Oscar award for the best film. So, that's why we're kind of making this connection, and that's what we're doing. And then we have a lot of fun stuff coming up, but we'll save that for next time. Anything else you have to say, Gar, before we wrap it up?
No, we're just, right now, the last time we played at Santa Fe Springs Swap Meet, what they do is they require us to do 3 one-hour sets, and Guns N' Roses doesn't have they got about an hour and a half of like super popular music, but a lot of the stuff after that is stuff that's good, but just not as not as not heard as much. And so when we did that show that you went to, what we did is we did our last set first. Okay. And then we took a break, and then we did our second set, and then we finished with our last set.
Oh wow!
And when we were discussing it before the show, I really was, I was voicing with the guys in the band that I wasn't really comfortable with that. I felt it would be better for us to do 3 separate 1-hour shows. Yeah. And I did contact, we did some shows earlier this year, but I did contact the booking agent that books us, and I asked him to not book us for a couple of months, so we could work on that third 1-hour set of material. So we are, in May, we're going to resume doing shows again, and our first show back is going to be at Santa Fe Springs.
Oh, cool.
And that first 1-hour set is going to be completely brand new material that we have never played in front of an audience before.
Well, we'll have to come check that out. I
have to admit that, I really, really enjoy this new material. There's really going to be some good stuff there. And, there's a lot of people that like to go to Guns N' Roses, to see us, but, they're kind of tired of listening to all the really super popular stuff, and they'd rather have a chance to hear, something else to kind of mix it up. This show's going to be a really good one to actually have a reason to come and see us do that first set, because it is going to be a debut, and we're putting a lot of really hard work into it, and it's really good stuff.
Well, that's good to hear, Gar.
It's not going to be something where if you show up you're going to be disappointed. It's definitely going to be stuff that you're going to be really surprised, because some of it is really challenging, very difficult stuff to play.
Well, that's good to hear, because I'm definitely planning to come to that show, my friend, and I dare say that any of your performances aren't disappointments, and I think part of the reason because you're always willing to kind of change it up. That might be why you'd want to throw something in like Since I Don't Have You from the Spaghetti Instant, because it's one of those tunes. Well, a lot of the diehard Guns N' Roses fans may not know it. A lot of them do, because, like I said, that's one of those songs. I mean, that's one song that we were talking about today that appeared on the soundtrack. It means so a lot of people love that song, and then by you performing it, people that maybe have never heard it before, like, oh wow, what's that song? That's a cool song. And then the final question I have you ever done something like what I think would be cool to do during one of your shows is it's kind of Guns N' Roses related, comes off of GNR Lies, Aerosmith, a cover of Aerosmith's Mamakin. Have you ever done that?
That's part of our extended. But our plan is because we've been doing because most of their stuff really fits nicely in a 90-minute show. What we want to do is we want to be able to do some of the stuff. It can be interchangeable. In the future, well, once we have this whole 1 hour set, indiscriminately we can add, interchange this new material with other stuff, as part of that show. So whenever you come and see us, it's not going to be the same show every single time.
Yeah.
We're probably gonna, open the set with different, basically what we're planning on doing is making it where whenever you come to see us, it's not going to be the same show.
Well, I think that'll make it a very cool show, because even some of my favorite all-time bands like Kiss, that's one thing they're kind of known for is, we play the hits, but those are the songs everybody wants to hear. And, like some of these bands, big bands like that, they might play a town, 2-3 nights in a row, and they play the same exact set list. So I think that's cool when bands kind of change it up a little.
Yeah, it's part of the plan, and I'm really kind of excited, and that's why I wanted to share that with you.
Well, great, Gar. I'm glad you gave us that exclusive, and we'll be talking again in 2 weeks, and this episode will go up on April 2nd, which is 1 week from Saturday. Yesterday. So we'll be seeing everybody in about a week, and they'll get to hear the episode we just did. And so thanks so much, Gar.
Chaotic Drift Magazine.